Hey guys, Dr. Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization, here to talk about our second most important training principle for raw powerlifting, which is overload. So in our principles, we have specificity that comes first, afterwards is overload, and then all the others. In our sort of visual perspective of how important overload is, we notice that overload is this big red square rectangle looking thing, and it accounts for a really big part of the variation in powerlifting program success. That is, to put it another way, if you are within the realm of specificity, you're actually doing training that's relevant to powerlifting, and you present an overload, which we'll learn exactly what that means in just a little bit, you're off to a pretty good start. And you can get away with doing a lot of other kind of weird stuff that maybe doesn't work that great, and you still experience a significant amount of success. And actually, in layman's terms, if you lift heavy weight regularly, and you're doing it in powerlifting style with the right movements, you're probably going to be pretty good. On the other hand, if you screw up overload, and you do some not good things conducive to that, you don't actually present an overload well, then you can do a lot of other stuff right. You could have really advanced tapering and deloading protocol, your routine can be perfectly aligned with your recovery, your variation can be great, but you're going to be really left lacking in actual powerlifting success if you don't present a very good overload. So let's take a look at what that means. So overload actually has a two-part definition. The first part is that in training to get bigger, and especially in training to get stronger, first of all, we have to be within our maximum threshold. That means if you can pull 500 for a couple of reps, pulling 200 pounds in any fashion really won't make you that much stronger because it's nowhere near your maximal abilities. So first of all, training has to be within that realm of maximal ability. And second of all, training has to be harder on average with time, week to week, month to month. If you squatted 500 2 weeks ago, you squatted 480 last week, and then the next week you plan on squatting 460, that's all within your maximum range if you have a max squat of maybe 530 or so, but it's not really presenting an overload because things are getting easier with time, not harder. On the other hand, if you did 500 last week, next week's 510, 520 the week after, and your max squat is 550, you're probably going to get stronger. That two-part definition of overload is critical. What does it imply for powerlifting training? Well, for muscle growth, for the part of powerlifting that involves getting bigger, you have to do enough volume and intensity to grow some real muscle. For the strength component, which is most of powerlifting, you've got to do enough intensity, that comes first, weight on the bar, and also volume for strength gains. And when you're peaking to get ready for a competition, you've got to have enough intensity. That means if you show up to a competition having not deadlifted heavy in months or squatted heavy in weeks, you might run into some trouble because intensity is critical for maximizing adaptation. All right, and sort of the bad ideas with regard to overload. There's some things some people in the industry and in powerlifting do, maybe not such great ideas with regard to this principle. Number one, and these aren't necessarily in order, some exercises just happen to not disrupt homeostasis. They don't give enough of a stimulus because they're just not that hard for the body to execute. So if you want really strong and big triceps, are you going to pick cable pushdowns or are you going to pick skull crushers if you have to choose? And you can replace that with any variety of movements. You know, are you going to do one arm lateral dumbbell raises for big shoulders and strong shoulders, or are you going to do overhead barbell presses? Well, overhead barbell presses, you can give this a shot, are much harder. They disrupt homeostasis, the body's ability to balance its systems very well. They challenge the physiology, they present an overload, and they make you bigger and stronger. So you've got to pick the right hard exercises to get the best results. Another mistake is doing too many light days or speed days. Now, light days and speed days are really helpful at the right time with recovery, but they don't directly help with strength. They don't actually make you stronger. Only multiple heavy sets, especially in the 3 to 5 repetition range, actually are going to make you stronger. So if you want to get stronger, you had better hope a lot of your training is spent right here, and just enough is spent with speed work. If every session ends up looking like a speed day, you might not be presenting an overload, you might just not be getting as strong as you can be. And last but not least, people do this all the time, and it always baffles. People don't track their reps and weights in training. They'll hit a deadlift And you're like, well, hey, is that a PR? Well, I don't know. I hit that similar for a set of 5, but this time it was a set of 3, but my back kind of hurts, so maybe. Well, do you write stuff down? Well, not really. I just come in and hit it hard. Well, if you don't write stuff down, how do you know what to present as far as an overload? I squatted a PR in the squat just a couple of days ago, last week actually. Why? Because it was in my sheet to squat that. Would I have ever put that weight on the bar willingly to do that many sets and reps? No way. I would have just done leg extensions and left. I felt pretty good. I'm pretty big and strong. That would have been good enough. You got to keep track of what you're doing so you can plan and say, now's the time for me to go overboard and really do some damage. And a lot of times, especially the stronger you get, it's stuff that looks nonsensical. It doesn't seem like you should be doing that, but you can only if you plan for it. Now, for some good ideas in powerlifting training with regard to overload. Number 1, training should be hard. In a 3 or 4 week accumulation program before you deload, even your first week should be a challenge. The last couple of weeks, especially the last one before you deload, should be pure unmitigated hell. You should be struggling to survive. That's what you signed up for. Nobody said powerlifting was supposed to be easy. If your last week is easy, you wasted a lot of time that month. And kind of related to that, you have to have a clear purpose in your training. If your training that day isn't hard, but it wasn't a planned or a taken recovery day, what's the purpose of showing up? Either you're training hardcore and presenting an overload and it's tough, or you're training to recover and then it's supposed to be easy. That middle ground is something you probably want to avoid in most of your training. A really good idea is to increase how much volume and intensity you do from week to week to week. That's one of the foundational elements of overload. So what does that mean in real life? You want to push it a bit further each week before deloading. You want to add how many sets you're doing. You started out doing 4 sets of squats in a program. Towards the end of that program, the last 3 or 4 weeks, you could be doing 6 to 8 sets of squats. And every week, you also add weight to the bar. That way, what was an overload last time your body got used to, now you present another overload and another overload. And that stepwise fashion called progressive overload is the fundamental basis of strength training. That's how you get strong. Challenging further every single week or on average the time that you train. Also, you want to plan to hit PRs. How do you know you're getting stronger? And almost all strong people, especially strong powerlifters, can confirm this. You know you're getting stronger when you're hitting rep PRs. If you're not hitting rep PRs, and these don't have to be high reps, 3 to 5 is just fine for most of your training. If you're hitting rep PRs, you're getting stronger. How do you hit rep PRs? Well, you plan for them. You say, today, I'm going to present one big overload, and I'm going to do something I've never done before. That really is the core of overload, doing stuff you've never done before. Because how are you supposed to get stronger if you never challenge yourself? And the true challenge, going outside of your boundaries. By a little bit, but enough to count. And lastly, in this list at least, you got to handle heavy weight. The reason I bring this up is some people seem to want to brag when they get a decent total, even a good total at a meet, about how little they did. Oh man, you know, I had deadlifted 2 months before this. Oh, my back was messed up. I haven't squatted in weeks. Oh man, I didn't even flat bench this time, and I got a huge PR. Well, that's nice. Maybe you were injured, or maybe your fatigue management really stunk. That's not a really good way to set up training. You want to make sure that at least in the 4 weeks before a powerlifting meet, you put some really heavy weight on your back for the squat, you put some heavy weight on your hands for the bench press, and you put some real heavy weight, I'm talking about 1 to 2 reps, 1 to 3 maybe, challenging, and you've got to pull heavy, at least in that last month, because when you show up to the powerlifting meet, that bar is really, really heavy, and you've got to be overloaded and adapted to it. Some real-world tips for training. Here's an idea for a lower bodybuilding or lower body training split. So on a Monday, hypothetically, you would do low bar squats for 2 sets of about 3 to 5 reps. Pretty challenging in that first week. After that, you take the weight down by about 20%, it's called a down set, and you do more sets of squats at 3 to 5 reps, just because you're tired, but there's still an ability to put in more work. You're not at training just to show off. You've also got to train. So once you've done your really impressive heavy sets, you take some weight off the bar and you keep banging away at it. And you can finish up the workout with some posterior chain work, good mornings or something like that. Thursday, later that week, some deficit deadlifting, just as an example. 3 to 5 reps, a couple sets heavy to start, And do some down sets too, because the workout doesn't end after just 2 sets. That's not much of a workout, that's more showing off. You've got to present that overload both in weight and in total volume, how many total sets you're doing. And of course, you do some high bar squats to hit the quads a little bit again. Next week, what you do is you add an average of 1 set per exercise. So instead of doing 2 sets and 2 sets of squats, you might do 3 sets and 3 sets of squats that next week. You add 10 pounds or so to each exercise. You up the weight, and you try to keep the reps about the same. So every week you're inching closer and closer to failure, where the last week you reach almost failure, pretty close. I don't think anyone here wants to fail with a squat for sure. Deadlift failure is demoralizing, and bench failure is okay if you've got some spotters. Failure training doesn't work that great for powerlifting and making you strong, so you want to sort of flirt with failure in the last week, deload, and then repeat the cycle all over again. So just some tips to kind of close out this conversation. You've got to use the effective, basic, compound, heavy movements. They're the best for overload. You want big, strong lads to contribute to your deadlift and possibly your bench press? Do some pull-ups, do some bent over rows, and save the pull-downs for the bodybuilders. No offense, bodybuilder. If you start a mesocycle, start the mesocycle or the month with moderate weights, and moderate a number of sets, something you can build on, but that's already pretty challenging. And then you've got to increase the weights and sets steadily throughout that mesocycle, that month of training, until that final week is brutal. If your week before deloading, this is a take-home message, if your week before you deload is not brutal and devastating and demoralizing, doesn't make you want to quit powerlifting, you're not training hard enough, right? Sorry to raise my voice. After this process, you deload appropriately, drop that fatigue, and we'll talk about that later on, and you repeat the process. That's the foundation of most good powerlifting training right there. And just as a side note, related to the discussion of overload, you've got to stay away from gimmicks and fads. It's either training, which is presenting an overload and is thus hard, or it's recovery, which should be easy. If it's some weird mix of the two, it probably doesn't accomplish a real distinct purpose, and it's not a good idea to base your training on. And another thing, if it looks too easy to work, it probably doesn't. So if someone says, hey, I've got this really advanced training method, you get to use frou-frou cables and machines and still get stronger, you get to deload a whole bunch and hardly ever train hard, if it doesn't have you putting in that real solid work week after week, it probably won't amount to much in raw powerlifting. That's all I have for today. See you guys next time.